Unit 731, Japan's Forgotten Hell Factory. They called it Unit 731. Officially, it was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. In reality, it was Japan's Auschwitz, except far fewer lived to tell the tale. Buried in the frozen plains of Japanese-occupied Manchuria, Unit 731 was a sprawling death laboratory where doctors played God and human suffering became a scientific method. Between 1936 and 1945, over 3,000 men, women and children were imprisoned inside its walls, not as prisoners of war, not as criminals, but as living test subjects. To the scientists of Unit 731, these people weren't human. They had another name for them, Maruta. It means logs, as in timber, disposable, replaceable. Because in the mind of Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind Unit 731, these logs were fuel for Japan's rise as a biological superpower. Shiro Ishii was no madman in a lab coat. He was charismatic, brilliant, and deeply ambitious. He believed biological warfare would be the ultimate weapon of the future, a force that could win wars without a single bullet fired, and he convinced the Japanese military to fund his dream. The result? A 6-square-kilometer complex complete with laboratory, testing chambers, operating rooms and crematoriums. It was a facility built for one purpose: to break the limits of human endurance, then study the aftermath. Prisoners, mostly Chinese, but also Russians, Koreans, Mongolians and even Allied POWs, were dragged from their cells for what the doctors called experiments. The term is misleading. These weren't controlled trials, they were torture sessions dressed up in scientific language. Vivisection was routine. That means cutting open living people without anesthesia to observe how their organs worked while still alive. Heart still beating, lungs still expanding, eyes wide open. Doctors would slice through flesh and jot down notes like surgeons performing on lab rats. Only these were mothers, farmers, students and political prisoners. They'd infect healthy subjects with anthrax, plague, syphilis, cholera and typhoid, then dissect them days later to see the internal effects. No sedatives, no painkillers, just cold instruments and clipboard observations. One prisoner reportedly had their stomach surgically removed and their esophagus sewn directly to their intestines, just to see how long they'd survive. Another had their limbs amputated and reattached in unnatural positions, legs where arms should be, arms where legs should be. Frostbite tests were among the most infamous. Victims were marched outside in sub-zero temperatures, their arms plunged into buckets of ice water and left until the flesh froze solid. Then, with military precision, the doctors would strike the limbs with sticks to determine when the skin had truly frozen, like tapping meat to check for doneness. Then they'd thaw the limbs with hot water or open flame, watching how the tissue responded, how the muscles died, how the skin peeled off. All of it was documented meticulously. Science, they said. Others were locked into pressure chambers and exposed to explosive decompression, ears bleeding, eyes bulging, lungs collapsing. Some were spun in centrifuges until their organs torn loose from gravity. Others were exposed to flamethrowers, poison food, dehydration experiments, blood transfusions with animal blood, each one more sadistic than the last. Pregnant women were forcibly infected with venereal diseases. Sometimes the pregnancies were terminated mid-labor with crude instruments. In some cases, their newborns were experimented on too. No one was spared, not even children. Outside the lab, Unit 731 tested their creations on the battlefield. Bombs filled with fleas carrying bubonic plague were dropped on Chinese villages. Water wells were poisoned, homes dusted with typhoid, and anthrax spores. Entire populations used as petri dishes for field tests. By the time Japan surrendered in 1945, Unit 731 had been responsible for the deaths of over 300,000 people, most of them civilians. But here's where the story turns even darker. After the war, the United States discovered the full extent of Unit 731's research. They knew what had been done, the vivisections, the germ bombs, the human test subjects. But instead of charging the doctors with war crimes, they cut a deal. In exchange for handing over their data, the complete results of every horrific experiment, Shiro Ishii and his staff were granted immunity. No trials, no prison, no hangings. Just a one-way ticket to American protection. The justification? The US feared the Soviets would get the data first. Biological warfare was too valuable, too strategic to pass up. Morality was sacrificed at the altar of military superiority. And so Shiro Ishii lived out his days in peace. He died in 1959 of throat cancer, never having answered for a single crime. Many of his colleagues went on to prestigious careers in medicine, academia, and industry, some even receiving government pensions. Japan itself buried the legacy of Unit 731 in silence. For decades, the subject was taboo, not taught in schools, not shown in films, not acknowledged by the government. Only in recent years have survivors, historians, and activists forced the issue into public view. Some former members of Unit 731, now in their 80s or 90s, have admitted what they did, often with chilling calmness. One doctor recounted vivisecting a teenage girl while she was fully conscious. "I thought she might scream," he said, "but she only whimpered." No remorse, no regret, just memory. China has turned the former Unit 731 compound into a museum. Rusted surgical tools, photographs of the victims, old documents, all preserved as evidence of one of history's worst atrocities. But outside those walls, many still don't know this ever happened. When we speak of war crimes, we think of Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald. But what happened in Manchuria was just as evil, just as calculated, just as forgotten. Unit 731 wasn't a rogue operation. It was a state-funded, scientifically supported engine of horror. It proves that cruelty doesn't require madness, only purpose. It shows how easily humans can become data points, how the white coat can be as dangerous as the jackboot. And it leaves us with a brutal truth. History doesn't only remember what happened, it remembers what it's allowed to remember. And Unit 731 was almost erased, buried, not by time, but by politics. Never let them tell you this didn't happen. Never let silence become denial. Because in that silence, evil breathes.